Hello, it is Monday as promised. Some stuff I didn't get to talk about on Friday. Um, Before I forget, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Lana K. I know there was no art to that, but I forget to do it. So there you go. Um, I wanted to talk about sort of the more positive elements of this most recent episode of Lady Bits specifically. Uh, and one was just to be super clear, the most important thing, and this is my bias as a content producer, the most important thing to me is that people are entertained, that they find watching the program an enjoyable experience in some way. It is more important that someone feels informed than that they agree. I do not need someone to agree. If they find the show funny and they don't agree and they watch it anyway, I think that is wonderful. We need more of that in the world. And it's very validating for me that people find those versus modes funny. An ongoing complaint I get from people is versus mode didn't show both sides. They always do in their own way. In this case, it was intended to goof on the dynamic that in discussions like, you know, these social issues, social justice issues, it tends to be one side screaming at the other side and the other side not being able to get a word in edgewise. That's where I was going for there. That is kind of both sides. And the fact that, the silent side managed to get their licks in at the end was deliberate, because you cannot persuade someone by yelling at them. You can't. You may shut them up. You may make them go away. You may make them feel bad. You won't change their mind. So, maybe it was subtle, but the primary purpose, first and foremost, of versus mode, it was always like this. That's why it's big, broad characters. That's why the format is what it is. The primary purpose of versus mode is to be funny. It's to break up the admittedly difficult, heavy subject matter. When you are talking about stuff like sexual violence and domestic assault, that's not fun stuff. This, when I was sourcing the images for certain places in it, going through and finding screenshots from games, I had to walk away a few times. It was just too hard to be bombarded with implied rape and men holding women by the throat and all that stuff. It's hard to inhabit that. Some of the research for Lady Bits has been, I'm like, man, how do I make this so the audience doesn't have the reaction I do, which is do not want. That's been a real challenge with this. And one of the big, and we've got one more to go, so I hope I can maintain it, but one of the big successes, I think, of this series is that people can continue to disagree and be entertained. I think that one of the issues we have in modern society is a lot of people can only enjoy something if they agree with the moral, or they like the characters and things like that, and that's not necessarily the kind of entertainment I enjoy all the time. I like to be challenged when I'm in the mood, and so and I like seeing different perspectives on things. And I don't necessarily subscribe to that perspective, but I like to understand it. And this has been really hit home by, I've been watching the memorial stuff for John McCain, and I keep thinking about the two sort of mantras that I picked up. One from reading his book, what is it? Faith of My Fathers. His autobiography that he co-wrote with Mark Salter. But one was, he talks about the fact that everybody eventually breaks. And this this has been a real source of strength for me because people don't get it. People do knock you down. I've been pummeled trying to do what I've been doing because I don't subscribe to either dominant online narrative, which is, sort of that mainstream misandrist form of feminist where sit down and shut up, men. You've had your opinion for long enough. I don't believe in that. And then there's the feminism is cancer thing. I don't subscribe to either. And maybe I'm a maverick, but there are serious consequences for that I am prepared to accept because I have to be able to live with myself. I can't feel like I'm lying with the opinions I espouse. But sometimes I do get beaten down. And that's when I remember, McCain talking about how he broke in captivity. He broke under torture. Not necessarily divulging information because he didn't have much, but mentally and emotionally and physically, he got broken. Everybody does if you beat them long enough. And I think that happens to too many people on these topics. It has happened to me again and again and again and again, and I have to pick myself back up. That's a skill. It is hard to learn, but it is an important skill to learn. And I think too many people go through life avoiding learning that skill because the only way to learn that skill is to get knocked down and heal. But you can't accomplish anything halfway good if you don't learn that skill. Because anytime you try to do anything of value, people try to beat you down. And they often succeed. And you just have to keep going. The other thing that I've started adopting more recently, because I just heard it more recently, is the McCainism. The worst thing that's ever going to happen in my life has already happened. What a beautiful statement. And believe it or not, it helps so much. Now, unfortunately, I have a high degree of certainty that I can say that about my life. But what a source of comfort. And I realized that was something I sort of had in me that I didn't have words for. And I think that's why I have had a different perspective on some of these internet fights that people have treated like a great danger to society. Things ending in gate that aren't Watergate. And I kind of have this, this is not really important attitude. And I know some people think that's callous. It's not callousness, it's experience. And this is what sort of made me appreciate conservatives like John McCain, who I pretty much disagree with on every political issue. But as a human being, what I saw and what I was reminded of, and I see this in the friends I have that identify as conservative as well. The thing about truly compassionate conservatives is the lens they view the world through. They truly have no hatred in their hearts. And that complete lack of hatred creates almost a naivete that I find sweet and frustrating at the same time, right? Because the compassionate conservative angle is an idea that people will just sort of gravitate towards the right thing. So we don't need diversity mandates. We don't need affirmative action stuff. We don't need Title IX. We don't need all that stuff. People will gravitate towards the right thing. That may not be something I believe in legislation, but it is something I highly value in the people in my life. And I've realized that even though I'm very left-wing, I more and more the older I get, and get stronger and stronger boundaries, more of my friends, the people I actually consider friends instead of just colleagues or acquaintances or contacts, tend to lean that way. And it's because even though our life experiences have had us perform express our core values through different social policies. We essentially want the same things for the same reasons. We just have different ideas of how to get there. And I think that if people like that work together, we can accomplish greatness. And this is why I'm not hung up on labels. You know, I don't care if somebody thinks I'm liberal or conservative. And I know they're only trying to buttonhole me because they want to paint me as evil one way or the other. I don't care if somebody thinks I'm a proper or real feminist or not. I don't care even what someone thinks about feminism as a whole. I used to when I was younger. I used to care a lot about that. I don't care anymore because I find that a lot of people, they will make derogatory comments about feminism in general, but then when you actually talk to them on an issue-to-issue basis, you know, should women be held back at work because they're women? Well, no. They say no. Okay, I don't care what they think about feminism as a movement. I care that we can work together on issue to issue to issue. Because your opinion of a movement doesn't get stuff done. Working on tangible issues gets stuff done. That's what I care about. And I realized that one of the things, seeing the speeches about McCain, he had a real commitment to getting stuff done, whether it be campaign finance or preventing prisoner of war torture, or some other things I didn't agree with because he was a conservative. He really had a commitment to actually getting stuff passed, to actually getting stuff done. You know, that military ethic of complete the mission. And I think that created in him a humility that only comes with wanting to get stuff done. Because if you believe in a cause, if you believe in something greater than yourself, it makes compromise on the less important things easier because you know what is important. And I think that a lot of the problem with modern discourse is that people have not learned resilience, and they have not really been goal-oriented. Everything's been very identity-oriented. It's about standing for things as opposed to accomplishing things. And things get really deadlocked because when it's about standing for something, you can't compromise because then you don't stand for it anymore. When it's accomplishing a specific goal, well, you can stand in the achievement instead of the opinion. And by specific goal, I mean, for instance, you know, I've worked with church groups that, church groups, even though I'm Jewish. That's how I roll. You know, your goals are to reduce teen pregnancy and vandalism in the area. All right. These are our goals. And obviously it's a church. They have some attitudes on modesty I don't agree with and I don't participate in, but I can aid in things like, you know, not sexualizing kids too young, not putting pressure on kids to be sexual before they really get any benefit out of it physiologically or anatomically. And that was sort of the point where we could work together, that I'm not going to repeat their views on modesty, especially with girls, because modest dress is one of those things. I can get on board with teaching young men and women both to be more aware of the signals they are sending that they may not be aware of because they're just copying stuff they see in like Taylor Swift videos. You know, I did agree with, you know, the program's position that when you wear those little short shorts to school, that has an effect on the straight boys and the gay girls in your class. Know what you're doing. And if you don't want that attention, which most girls claim to not want that attention, don't wear those shorts because you are going to get that attention. That to me is a much better way of doing things than shaming someone for not being ashamed of their body, to try to induce shame. Because I do think that certain things become harder in life, especially anything medical. It does become harder if you're ashamed of your body. It makes it harder to talk about when you are a victim of inappropriate contact, of assault. It makes it harder to come forward and say, this happened to me. Because there's this idea you're taught you should have prevented it somehow. And if you don't prevent it, it's because, you acted like a little slut and you had it coming and all these things that we're taught as a society. And I think that actually, I think this failure to prevent abuse is actually especially toxic in young men. I think a lot of men won't even name what happened to them because it's too shameful. Because men are supposed to be able to fight for themselves, and fight off this stuff. And abuse doesn't work that way. Abuse isn't a fair fight. Abuse is somebody using something, and it may not be physical strength. It may be social influence. It may be a lot of other things. But they use that against you to take away your ability to defend yourself. So it can happen to anyone because everybody has weaknesses. Everyone has places they're vulnerable. Everyone has something that they will degrade themselves to protect. And a football player spoke at McCain's memorial. I missed his name. He plays for the Arizona Cardinals. But he did a little, compare and contrast part of his eulogy that talked about how him and McCain were different. And this is a football player, okay? Football players are not known for being world scholars, but I love hearing voices like football players, like rappers, like things like that, because they have this layman's wisdom that is more brilliant than any work of academia you will ever read. And he did this wonderful thing where he said, I'm black, he's white. And immediately, yeah, privilege, right? Black men have it rough in America. But then he got into, I'm a young man. He's not that young. So he touches on ageism, right? And then he gets into the fact that John McCain was a disabled veteran. He couldn't comb his own hair. He couldn't raise his arms above his head because they didn't heal properly when he was in captivity. And, this is a guy who's a professional athlete. And then he talked about how he has like these braids. And he talks about, I have flowing locks. John McCain didn't. And this football player understood the complexities of privilege in the world in a way that a lot of so-called advocates don't. He understood that even though some of these disadvantages that come with certain skin colors, notably Black and Hispanic people, that's something he has to struggle with. He can comb his own hair. And there's another person that just hasn't been so consumed by doctrine, so educated into blinders, because level of education has its own privilege that you have to be very careful of. Something I've had to watch in the past myself. Some people bring up old stuff that I did and it seems very different from what I do now, because it is very different. I was still coming out of that bubble of academic privilege and the manner of speech that creates. It is a very real thing, and it is insidious as shit. Because unless you have the right words, you don't get heard. And again, that impacts Black and Hispanic people who have a different way of speaking in general. Their families speak differently because their families are less likely to be college educated. So, if you're the first person in your family to go to college, you have to code switch. And it's exhausting. And I am really sick of people lecturing people on privilege without really understanding it. It's this weapon people used, and it was never intended to be that way. My husband hates the word privilege, and I'm starting to agree that we need to find another way to say it. So maybe that's where I'll leave it. Does anybody have a suggestion for a word I can use that describes the same thing? Because privilege isn't an advantage. Privilege is the state of not having to constantly think about something. For example, men are privileged to not have to worry constantly about rape avoidance, right? That's a privilege. White people do not have to have the same concerns or fears dealing with law enforcement. These are things we are privileged to not have to consider. That's what privilege means. Able-bodied people don't have to worry about how they're going to get their hair combed in the morning like John McCain. That's what privilege is. It is blind spots that nobody begrudges, because there have to be some things in life we don't have to worry about. There have to be some places that are safe. What do we call that, if not privilege? Let me know your ideas, and thanks for watching. Happy Monday.